welcome to Gameful Design with StudyCrafter. Casper, if you want to take it away.
Well, thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be invited by the Design Museum Week and speak about StudyCrafter, which is a project I've been working on since 2014. And what I want to show today is the different kinds of forms of design that we've done with StudyCrafter. StudyCrafter itself as a product is also a design product, but we have really explored all kinds of different forms of design, and that's what I'm going to showcase today. I also want to acknowledge that all the work that's being done here is as part of my research group, which is called Kosa, and many of the members are here on the call. And one of my most frequent collaborators is here too, which is Giovanni Troiano. And if there's any questions at the end, Giovanni is here too to answer anything and to brainstorm with what kind of possibilities are beyond what we've presented here today. Because the possibilities are really endless, and that's also what I want to demonstrate with what we've done. So gameful design. So I'm a associate professor of game design, and I teach game design. But a lot of my research work is about using games for serious purposes or thinking about how games can be applied for social good. And so that's what really gameful design comes into. But the way that I apply it in my practice is in two different specific ways that I like to do it. So one is that I like to explore the use of games myself or ourselves with my research group. And so this is sort of like tinkering and applying games to, for instance, gamify science, to gamify education, or to gamify the way that we are thinking about health. So in that way, me and my research team are basically thinking about how can we apply what we know about games or games themselves and apply that into different contexts for social good. And then there's the second part that I'll also demonstrate, and all of that we've done with StudyCrafter primarily, is the ability to empower others. Because one of the things that I've noticed is that, and that's not only me, there's a lot of literature that showcases that games do have positive impact, for instance, on learning, but also on having people feel motivated and engaged about a certain topic. But the issue is there's only so many games that certain people can make, and there's many more topics and domains and areas where games could be made for. And so here's what we're trying to do is the ability to empower others to make games, not just for ourselves. We're trying to really make sure that other people are also able to enjoy and create the kind of games that we think are really powerful and have a lot of potential for society. So those are the two ways that we're experimenting with design. So on the one hand, we're exploring design, specifically gameful design, ourselves using StudyCrafter. And the other aspect is that we're letting other people design with StudyCrafter. Now, I've mentioned StudyCrafter many times, and you're probably wondering, what is it? So let me show you a video of how it all started. That was a long time ago. And in our vision, it wasn't called StudyCrafter at the time. It was called Math Science. And in our vision, we wanted to create a really engaging environment where people were tinkering and exploring in all kinds of different ways, also mostly focused on studying human behavior. And we wanted to create some sort of metaverse, if you like, these days, it's called, where different people are creating all kinds of playful, gameful experiences that people could experience. But let me start with the introduction that we filmed at the time. And just checking, can you all hear the sound? I did enable it. Yep. Okay.
Up here! Welcome to Mad Science Inc. Please, follow me inside. Our corporation has a long, rich history We once looked into all the traditional disciplines, chemistry, biology, and physics. These were exciting times, and we made a lot of fun discoveries. But
People!
yes, people. We haven't figured that one out yet. Why, oh why, do people do what they do? That's what the corporation is now focused on. We mad scientists are creating and participating in social experiments to understand why people do what they do. We use proprietary machinery to accomplish this. With this machinery, we can create settings where we can experiment with human behavior. We can create objects, change the setting, and even change how you are perceived by others. From one setting to another, you can be changed from a woman in a business suit to a man with swimming trunks. We perform these experiments in Mad World, which is the island across from us. We are glad that you are joining our society, where we could use a new curious mind like yours. As a new member, you need to know the 4 core rules of our society, the laws of mad science. Rule number 4 is, we may be mad, but we are mad about something. Rule number 3 is, we may be mad, but we are not crazy. Rule number 2 is, we may be mad, but we are mad together. Rule number 1 is, we may be mad, but we are mad fun. Now off you go, apprentice. It's time to learn how to be a mad scientist and join us in our quest for knowledge.
All right, we're still mad fun, but we did get rid of the mad science moniker and name and moved on to calling it StudyCrafter. And that was in part of just the iteration and the involvement of the project itself, where we're noticing that it could be used for many more applications than we first imagined. And we also noticed that for all what gamefulness could be interesting and engaging and fun for, it sometimes also detracts from actually being productive and getting something done and making it sure that it's user-friendly. So as we were iterating over the product, we were trying to make it more user-friendly, and as a result, we took away some of the mad sciencey theme that we originally incorporated, and also, yeah, to make sure that it really looks like a mature authoring tool that could be used by anyone. And so the name came as StudyCrafter, and this is a short introduction of how the tool looks like right now, so you have a good idea of that as well. All right. So just to give you a good explanation of what StudyCrafter involves before I get into the number of applications and examples that we've used to explore ourselves, but also to empower others. So essentially, StudyCrafter is a platform. It has an online website that's freely accessible. And on the website, you can register, have an account, and then you can create projects. To create these projects, you basically have an editor, and then that editor, there are 2 tabs that are really all that you really need to care about, which is, on the one hand, there is the layout tool, and in the layout tool, you essentially create what you see. So this is basically the interface that you're creating. Currently, StudyCrafter is really limited to 2D, although you could create projects and experiences that have a first-person perspective. But essentially, these are really projects that are on a 2D screen and create an interface just like what you see here. The interface looks a little bit like Photoshop. You can drag around. There's a library of art assets here. You can upload your own art assets as well into the environment and then move items around as you please. Then on the other hand, you've got the scripter. The scripter is basically a decision tree where you are determining what's going to happen during a scenario. So here you could put in dialogue. You could include actions which involve moving objects, or the character is moving if you have a character. There's some advanced functionalities where you could request calls to another website or server. And there's also, of course, because you could create game-like experiences or games where you could include choices that people can include in their experiences. All projects are automatically logged. So all data is collected automatically, and you will have access to your data on your account as people are playing and accessing your projects. So that, in a nutshell, is what it looks like. And as I said, what I'm presenting here today is sort of our efforts for exploring ourselves and empowering others. And I'll first go over a couple of examples of how we're exploring ourselves. So the first example is that of using StudyCrafter to create serious games. So serious games is in label, and there's many others that describe the use of games for non-entertainment purposes. So the typical use people think about is the use of it for education, but it can also be used for public advocacy, for training, for health. There's many forms in which serious games have been developed and applied, and you could pretty much think of any domain and you could think of a game that would be applicable there. We've created with StudyCrafter two examples that I'm providing here. The first is a serious game we created with StudyCrafter, which is focused on pro se litigants. So pro se litigants are people who are representing themselves in court. And at issue here was that many people have never been to court. And it's a very anxious experience to go to court, especially if you have to present a case that is really important to you. And so what we did was we created an experience where you go through that before you actually go to court, that the game is actually set up in the beginning such that the game starts with you being in the courtroom and a lot of things go wrong. But then you wake up, it happens just to be a dream, and you get out of bed and then you start preparing to go to court. Because what we noticed when we were talking to experts in this area is that it's really important to think about the whole process before you go into court, like what kind of documents you need to have, what kind of arrangements you need to make in order to get to the court hearing, et cetera, et cetera. So we've created this game. It's accessible on mobile phones, and so people can get this in addition to getting information online and whatnot. So that's one example of a serious game. The other one is called Embrace, and this is for post-cancer survivors. So once you're in such a situation, your life will not completely be the same. And so what we tried to do is create a serious game that provides some coping mechanisms to post-cancer survivors themselves. But it's also a game that could be provided to family members and friends so that they could have a better understanding of what it's like to be a post-cancer survivor and create some empathy towards them. And that would also better help resolve the situation for those folks. So in these kind of ways, we've created these games, and what you can see here too is completely different art styles that were used. So as I mentioned, you can upload your own art styles to StudyCrafter and recreate an environment. And you also see different in which the interface is working. So here there are no characters in the scenes; they're at the forefront, and here there are characters in the scene that can move around. So that's one way in which we export ourselves, which is a very logical extension. If you're creating an engine or an authoring tool to create games, or gamified experiences, then you would create serious games. But we've actually also explored the use of StudyCrafter in other kinds of ways, and typically apply it now to the domain of science. And with science, we've been really looking at different ways of gamifying existing scientific methods. And one of them is focused on gamified experiments. The example I'll give here is as by a project from my PhD student. I think he's also on the call, Omid. So if you have any specific questions on this, I would defer to him on it. But what he's done is he's created an environment of a drug supply chain game where you're playing a particular role in that supply chain, and you need to make certain decisions. And what's great about this is that you cannot only simulate this and use that for educational purposes, you can also create these environments to see how people make decisions under different kinds of circumstances. So he created a game experience where it starts with a briefing, then there's a gameplay where you have to make decisions in different rounds, and then there will be a debriefing at the end, and then a survey, kind of like an experiment, if you like, but then in the form of a game. But what he's done is, while people are playing this game, there are certain manipulations, just like you do in a regular experiment. And so one of the manipulations is that some people play this game without information sharing, and some people play this game with information sharing. And so here you see specifically that in this condition, people do see the manufacturer's inventory, and in this condition, they do not. Now, you can imagine many more manipulations and different kind of aspects that you can control and change. And that's the great thing of games as a way that you have a format which is rich, experiential, but does allow you to change things and see how people respond to that. And you can then collect data and try to see what kind of behavior emerges from this. And so one of the things that Omid recently found were that when it comes to if a disruption happens in a supply chain, there are 3 different types of behavioral responses, or different human types of behaviors. So if a disruption in a supply chain happens, there's people who've been hoarding from the get-go. So in the supply chain, they've been over ordering so that they have enough stock already, regardless of if the disruption already happened. Then there's people who react to the disruption. So disruption happens in the supply chain, and then people start changing the behavior. And then there are people who are followers who basically follow whatever suggestion is provided to them. So just to be clear, when people are playing this game, the game does provide a suggestion of what to order. And so there's a group of people who always follow the direction. And I need to emphasize that we did check if these people are actually playing the game as they should be, that they are engaged and not just clicking through it, because that, of course, can still be a situation that can emerge if people are participating in experiments. So we had to check for that kind of bias. But on all measures that we checked for, these people are still very much engaged in the game. So this is very interesting that you could use games basically as a way to study human behavior, and this is one form of it, and that's the form of a gamified experiment. Now, we've been exploring, there are many other methods too in research, and one of the most popular ones are surveys, which, as we all know, have a relatively low response rate. There's also all kinds of biases involved when it comes to filling out surveys. People are aware that they're filling out a survey, and they might provide responses that are more desirable. So we've been tinkering and exploring making these sort of more gamified. So there's different ways that you can do this. And I actually gave the assignment to a couple of students and said, here's an existing survey, traditional survey, go and try to make this into a gamified survey. And then I sort of explored how they actually handled that task. And it's really interesting because they did all kind of different ways of how they were looking at it. So one student, for instance, created situations based on the Big 5 personality survey, and created sort of situations where you could extract how that relates to one of the Big 5 components. And that was just one way of doing it. And there's all kinds of other ways to think about how to gamify that too, what kind of elements of a game you would include in such a gamified survey. So one of the ways that we've done it here and I'll show this here is like basically in this gamified survey, there's sort of like game choices. So in a way, it's somewhat similar as a regular survey. You basically get multiple choices and you choose what you want to do, but more situated. And then there is a form where you're actually taking actions. So it's a little bit more game-like, where you take gameplay actions that are reflective of something that you want to measure. So in this case, it's cleaning or destroying. So you could choose whether you're clean the kitchen or destroy the kitchen, which is a demonstrative of a particular behavioral type. And then there are narrative choices. So you're engrossed into a narrative, and the choices you make will be reflective of something that we aim to measure. And then, we did compare this also to traditional surveys to kind of see whatever happens in the gamified survey, to what extent does that relate to the traditional survey? And that's the kind of research that we're still exploring and looking into. Of course, one of the big issues here is, what is the ground truth? Because the traditional survey is not necessarily the ground truth, and the gamified survey isn't either. So this is sort of like a really interesting issue that we're trying to still grapple with. The other element that we've explored are lesser known methods that we've applied StudyCrafter to. And here, very relevant still onto this day, is that we applied it to speculate about COVID-19. And so what we did here is there's a method called the story completion method. And in the story completion method, you basically start with a story stem that the participants need to complete. So it's a qualitative data collection method. And here you can see an example. What does Saul see? And then you need to write a response to that, which you can see here as well. And so what we created in this gamified story completion method, so this is not a gamified survey or gamified experiment, but a gamified story completion method. What we did here is we incorporated different story stems throughout the experience, and people had to type in open responses. So again, it's not the example I first gave of the gamified experiment. You're basically having gameplay actions. The gamified survey has all kinds of different responses you can provide, but here you're actually providing open responses, so qualitative open responses in text that we extracted from this experience. And we got some really interesting themes from this. So here we did qualitative analysis, and we found all kinds of different ways that people were relating, because what we wanted to do here was to see what do people think about a post-COVID future, and what that looks like. And some people were thinking about more business as usual, getting back to normal. Some were more thinking about going back to the basics, and some were very fatalistic, thinking of some sort of end of the world style scenario as they were describing this. So it was also really interesting how different people were contemplating what the future would look like, and we were able to extract it that way through this gamified story completion method. So I gave you some examples of how we explored ourselves using StudyCrafter in different applications and in different kind of ways of how we wanted to go about it. And there's many different design configurations even possible than I just presented here. And that's also the exciting part, and that me and my team are continuously thinking about. But the other aspect that we focused on was to empower others. So not have us design using StudyCrafter, but having other people use StudyCrafter to design something for themselves or for people in their classroom. And one particular example that I want to provide here to start off with was by complete coincidence. So I work at Northeastern, and my office used to be located among the Northeastern advisors, and they used to onboard, or they still do that, they onboard incoming students with all the resources that are available. There's a website for it, but they noticed that the students weren't really reading the website or weren't really processing the information that was provided there. So then they moved on to a video that explained all of that, but they noticed that, again, the students weren't really processing the information or didn't really get the kind of information that they needed to know. So I was talking in the hallway. That was pre-COVID, where we're still walking around and talking around the coffee machine. And I talked about StudyCrafter, and then one of the advisors was like, "Oh, maybe I could create that to onboard students." And so it happened. Gave them access to StudyCrafter, and they started completely on their own. Created an experience for students to get onboarded, and they iterated this design over time, and they provided this to the students. And this turned out to be, quite successful. Anecdotally, the advisors told me that the students were much better knowledgeable about all the different resources and how they needed to navigate the Northeastern system after just playing this this interactive onboarding as opposed to the video or the website. So that's one example of empowering others. A more recent example, which is going to be presented next week at a conference, is that of Gamified Therapy. So I saw that this advisor was able to do it without much help and use StudyCrafter for their purposes, and inspired also by the COVID-19 pandemic and seeing that many people are struggling with mental health. I thought, well, maybe one way to deal with this is to provide gamified therapy focused on anxiety, and let's see how we can do that. There's many different ways that can be done, and I figured, well, maybe we should empower psychotherapists to be able to create gamified therapy. Does it even work? And what do they think of it themselves? So we went and started with 7 psychotherapists, and that's what we started with, and gave them StudyCrafter. We set up a workshop where we met during a couple of weeks, where they were designing themselves, not with help of us. I mean, we were giving input and we provided technical support, but they were creating themselves individually a StudyCrafter gamified therapy, and we also wanted to see what we could learn from what they created. So eventually, 6 psychotherapists continued and completed and created a playable prototype, and it was really interesting to see, what kind of therapeutic techniques they were incorporating into it, how they were actually leveraging the affordances that the game environment provides. Because with a game environment, there are different techniques possible that they usually wouldn't necessarily apply in their own therapy, and they were also exploring and experimenting with that, which was really interesting to see. But they were also able to really transfer some of the therapeutic techniques into that of a game, which is also a really interesting thing to think about, that maybe it is good to have these psychotherapists and empower them to create these kind of experiences, as opposed to just a game designer who does not know anything about therapeutic techniques. And so we had a discussion at the end, what the future could look like, because of course these were still prototypes. They're not as refined and matured as and could be immediately applied. And some of the insights were that they really loved to incorporate this into their own therapy, and many wanted to continue to work on their games and incorporate it into their therapy. They didn't say, this can replace therapy. There's still a huge need for one-on-one therapy with a therapist, but it could be incorporated into the therapy. It can also make therapy more accessible because these can be provided online and people can access them. They can also be personalized and customized, much more so. And one interesting insight that we got from this too was that they were suggesting that patients themselves could create StudyCrafter experiments. So not the psychotherapist, but their patients would be creating a StudyCrafter experiment as part of their therapy, which was a really interesting idea that is worth further exploring. So in this case, we were empowering the psychotherapists, but they want to empower their patients for therapeutic purposes. Well, the most logical way being a professor is, of course, also to gamify education, which I have done. So in one of my classes, I started working, and because I teach a research methods course, and I already mentioned the gamified experiments earlier on, and one of my modules is about teaching experimental research. So I basically asked my students to create a gamified experiment as part of learning about experimental research. And I've been doing this for quite a bit of time now, very successfully so. And starting next week, I will be starting a new research project. We'll be extending this to 10 plus universities who will be incorporating StudyCrafter into their classroom, supported by the National Science Foundation. So we are broadening it to not just my classroom, but to many more classrooms where we're trying to gamify education, and in this case for teaching experimental research. But you could also gamify education to have students create games, which is what we've also done. So last summer, we basically empowered high school students to create games using StudyCrafter, and these were serious games that they were creating, and that was part of a summer program organized by the Northeastern Center of STEM Education. And here we were also focusing on data science, because the students had to also collect data and analyze the data that were retrieved from the experiences. And we're going to replicate this experience starting tomorrow. We're going to work with a group of girls from Nigeria, and in over a period of 4 weeks, they will be creating a serious game, collect data, and learn about game design, learn about data science in that manner. So we're getting to the end of it. So to conclude, basically what we've done with StudyCrafter is to explore ourselves and empower others, and really think about design in many different domains and applications, and different angles, from education, health, science, communication, also DEI, when you think about, for instance, the pro se litigants. But there's also many other opportunities to think about this. And there are many other domains that I haven't even touched upon that could be applied or could be thought of. And so what is our vision in the end? And so if you ever work with PowerPoint, and I use this as an example, and you're creating slides, there's this button called Design Ideas. And when you click on it, you can, PowerPoint gives you all kinds of suggestions, and that makes it possible to really quickly and easily create all kinds of slides yourselves. I mean, it goes a lot faster. I'm not always happy with the results, I will admit that. In this case, I'm not sure I'd like any of the suggestions, but I did find it to be very useful. And here you see that you could co-create, with the computer, an experience. And that's what we want to do for StudyCrafter too, to make it easier for people to create projects and have this sort of co-creative process using AI, which is what we're going to do. But why are we interested in this? Because the eventual vision is really that a product like StudyCrafter would be so easily accessible that, if you're a teacher, for instance, and you want to create a quiz, there's lots of tools out there, and you could create a quiz. If you want to create a survey, there's lots of tools out there to create a survey. But if you want to create a game, yes, there are tools, but they're not that very accessible. Only people who are trained and skilled, they can make use of those tools, and they also still need to put in a lot of time and effort. It's not like as a teacher, you can press a couple of buttons and you have a game. And it won't be like that entirely, but we can get closer to it in the way that you're also now getting help when you're creating a PowerPoint slide. So that's it. If you're interested in StudyCrafter, this is the URL to it.